What if we lived in an ordered world that, say, was here before us? We'll just call it the created order. And trying to remove things from that order doesn't work. It just shifts things around and things fall into place and move around. And I think that's one excellent way to understand what happened with feminism. Okay, what do you mean by these moving things around? Well, look, I think that there's a straight line from the collapse of Christendom to the collapse of chivalry to feminism. I'm not going to dwell on the collapse of Christendom and the hierarchy there and the beheading of the king. I've talked about some of those things elsewhere in the history videos with Adam, for example. But let's just zoom in a bit and see if there's a way that we can understand the relationship between the knights and chivalry and removing that from the world, maybe as a way of removing war from the world or something equally foolish, and that creating a void and something rushing in to take its place. I think if you look historically, these things came in that sequence. So as Christendom has less and less, we'll say, militaristic force behind it, there is a church militant that's a little bit different, we'll say, but also you need to have the force of humans mediated by something, and it shouldn't be government or politics, right? And so when it was the church, you could go on crusades and save other faithful, holy people from certain destruction by alternative religions, we'll say. And that was a good thing. And then there was a way to, we'll say, keep those strong men with the ability to use force and we'll say the armament and capability and training to do so at bay. And the way you keep them at bay seems to be with a set of rules that everyone knows effectively, right? That they're spread throughout the land. You see a knight is supposed to be chivalrous. These are the behaviors that are expected of a knight. And then, of course, having that there, right? So knights are upper class. They're not peasants. It's not that peasants can't become knights, although it's rare, but that's not the way it is. These are the people that the peasants look up to. And so they exemplify or model or mimic, this is where mimicry comes in, that behavior. When you lose that, you lose a bunch of things. But first of all, what is chivalry? Chivalry is the protection of women, strange women even, for no apparent reason other than your duty as somebody who has responsibilities as the result of having a higher place or a special privilege or having this special training, having this special equipment, having been trained and brought up within a structure. And so it's not a rigid structure, right? And so you have a situation where there's different ways, there's different roles that a knight can play. And maybe they're just bad at fighting and they're really good at strategy. And so they kind of graduate out of that. And maybe they're on the battlefield and maybe they're prepared for battle, but really they're there to help with strategy or any number of other roles that can be played. But the most important part is once you're a knight, you're supposed to be chivalrous. Why? Well, because that's the way it is. It's really important. It's not arbitrary in the sense of it can be anything. It's actually not. It has to be that way. Otherwise, you end up with an army that destroys, we'll say, the religious, in this case, the religious ethos of the thing it's trying to protect, right? And so we've got the divine feminine archetype, that would be Mary in this case. That is something that needs to be protected, we'll say, at all costs, including the human life, right? So that's why these are soldiers, effectively. And hopefully they don't have to do that, but they may have to do that, right? It's expected of them to do it when it's required. And when you lose that, when you take that away, you leave a void, right? The void of people protecting women for no apparent material reason. There's no advantage in it, we'll say, from an evolutionary standpoint, which is true, by the way. I know the evolutionists will tell you otherwise, but they can't make the case because evolution says the opposite, effectively. There's no particular reason why they should want to risk going to war and have this extra burden on them, because it's not universal, right? There's other armies where they just don't care, and they're revered warriors, right? They have a high status, but also they'll just rip through another population and destroy every man, woman, and child without any thought. So there's something about this chivalry, this protection, that actually matters. When you take that away, who's going to protect the women? And we can argue about when it went away or how it went away. I really don't want to get into that. I'd have to do a bunch of research, which I'm too lazy to do right now, and it's not important to my point. My point is, when you remove that protection of women, right, through force, these are knights. This is not a trivial thing. And the ones that are mimicking them may not be knights, but they're still willing to use force in many cases. It might be a much lesser force, but force is force, man. It beats not force. And something's got to come in to protect the women. And if the women don't feel protected by the men, by random men, just any old man should be able to protect me and should do so without me having to ask, then they have to do it themselves. They have to do it themselves. And so that's sort of the early seeds of feminism. And feminism, interestingly, and there's an earlier video about the history of feminism on this channel here, which I'll link here. Interestingly, sort of starts in the milieu of the French Revolution. How interesting. Oh, lots of evil happens in the French Revolution. How strange. It's almost like that really matters a lot, but not in a good way, because no good seems to have come out of it at all, right? Not even a scintilla of goodness. That might be important later. Might be important now. Might be important. Really important. And so you have the situation where these women are not being protected by these men. They're being treated poorly by men in the midst of the French Revolution, where it's very dangerous. Very dangerous. And they're doing things that maybe they shouldn't, right? So there's Mary Wollstonecraft, who ends up basically bearing somebody who becomes an author, writes Frankenstein. It's a very strange ordeal she goes through. And that seems to be in light of this collapse of Christendom and the beheading of the king. And that is the start of this movement. She was told to leave because she wasn't safe around the Jacobins. You better leave France. The Jacobins might eat you, even though they're supposed to be the good guys, kind of, to some of these people. And she feels sorrow at the beheading of the king, which sort of surprises her. These are all very strange things. And yet she writes this stuff that later gets picked up by the more modern feminists, if you will, right, to justify this. Well, yeah, they kind of have to justify it, because with the Marquis de Sade running around and the destruction of this chivalrous idea, and in fact, where are the knights, right? I mean, they're long gone by this point. They got to do something. And women have to protect themselves. And so how do they do that? Well, feminism offers them an opportunity for doing that. Like, if we were equal to men, we wouldn't have to worry about men. Well, yeah. I mean, it doesn't work, obviously, because men and women aren't equal. That's why we have two different labels for them. Really that simple. People get upset. It really is that simple. Like, sometimes you have two different words because they're pointing at different things, and it's super simple, right? So in this case, women and men are different. They're not equal. They're not going to become equal. There's nothing you can do to make them equal. There's a biological difference there that isn't easy to get around. And there's no reason to get around it, because if you got around it, everybody would be the same, and then men wouldn't need women and women wouldn't need men. And why not have relationships with the same sex if it's just sex? Right? If it's just material, what difference does it make? Right? But of course, that dynamic between men and women, that dynamic, not the sex act itself, although also that, is what creates life. And continually creating life is the thing that provides, we'll say, the most meaning through time. It's also the underpinnings of evolutions. It's very strange that the materialists don't see all this. I guess if they were smarter and they actually did their homework and thought about it a little bit longer, if they're capable, they would kind of figure it out. Oh, that's why this matters. The pre-existing formula is correct. Without that protection of women, though, then whatever, quote, evolutionary course, if you want to think of it that way, that you're on is not going to last. It's going to degenerate. And that doesn't mean it's going to go away entirely necessarily, obviously, but it's going to degenerate. And I think you can see that. I think you can look at civilizations without Christendom and notice some patterns of degeneration, or at least the inability to, we'll say, create lasting civilization. And so the concept of civilization is super important. And when you don't have a working system that protects women, they have to try to protect themselves, but that causes all sorts of other rippling corruptions. You'll notice that a lot of feminists make a big deal about, well, women couldn't do this and women couldn't do that. All of the things they list are just wrong. They're just absolute flat out lies. Like everything. It's kind of amazing, actually. Like, how did you lie about everything? Well, it just turns out you have to. Otherwise, feminism doesn't make any sense. And that's really the problem, right? Once you realize, oh, this is just based on pure lies, much like communism and other forms of socialism, it's just based on pure lies, right? It's just based on false statements, anti-factuals, if you will. Then you kind of get a sense. And the real question then would be, well, can't we just return chivalry to the world? It's like, well, we could if the world weren't flat. I'm sure that would work, but we're living in this flat world where everyone's got this video game reality idea of how things work. And it's a real problem. Like, it's a huge, 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 big problem. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know how to fix this or anything like that. I'm just trying to point out, you remove the protection from women, feminism comes rushing into the void because women have to be protected. Like, otherwise, nothing continues. Technically, nothing. Zero things. All gone, right? And so there are these, I like to call them non-optional components, just because that's the best secularese I can come up with for it. These non-optional components, you remove them, you create a vacuum, something fills the void. It's probably going to be worse than that which came before, because that just happens to be how it is. If you believe in distributed cognition and you understand time, we got here for a reason, right? Maybe we should be real careful about what we change, because maybe the reason those things are there are things that take a cognition greater than our own personal private cognition or personal private perspective to understand, all of which has to be true, by the way, like has to be correct. Just telling you. So you have this situation where you're removing things from the world or moving things around or changing things in the world without any appreciation for what they afford you. And you can't maintain a hierarchical structure of any kind without force. And you can cast this in a different light very easily. Like, you could say, well, that's not true for corporations. Corporations fight through corporate takeovers and competition, and that's all based around money, right? Well, the thing is, though, if you just convert money, which is an abstraction, into physical force, it all maps perfectly well, actually. It all maps perfectly well. You have to do funny things with debt and things like that, like indebtedness, loyalty. All of those things will show up again or could be mapped onto any economic model, actually, any one of them, right? Because they're all pointing at the same thing, which is human behavior, which just happens to be stable across humans. So that's pretty easy. And especially at the group level, 100% mapping, right? And so you can say, oh, well, corporations use money instead of lances to fight, or swords, or whatever you want to use, right? And so they have protections like stock as chainmail. You can make those comparisons. It's a lot of work. It's kind of unnecessary, but it's actually the same things going on. It's the same set of patterns. You can't just remove things from the world and expect nothing to take its place. you can make a good argument for, well, we have to be really careful what we put into the world, because once it's there, we may be creating something or moving resources towards something that then will need to be there. That's true. That happens all the time. And so it's not clear to me that you could just reinstantiate chivalry and get rid of feminism. I don't think that would work at all. I think there's now untangling that needs to be done. And so we can't just back up from how we got here to get out. Sometimes you can. In this case, I don't think you can. Because of this flat world problem, we don't have the king exemplifying the proper behavior towards a woman. That kind of started with Henry VIII, by the way. If you haven't seen the history videos with Adam, you really should. And so you have this ongoing problem of this flattening that has created this situation where women have to be equal to men because there's nothing above them to protect them. And the thing above them is not the men, it's the chivalry, because that's a second order abstraction that applies across all men, right? It can't be equally because all men are not equal. So let's not get down that rabbit hole, right? And then other men are supposed to, because it's bigger than them, also enforce it, as well as all the women are supposed to enforce it. And when that works, and the last time that worked was probably the Victorian era or something, which is interesting in and of itself. The last time that worked, it worked really well. We're still nostalgic. We still have this romantic idea of the Victorian era for that reason. There's lots of other things we're not so thrilled about the Victorian era for. Most of those are lies, by the way, but that's not for this video. And so I want you to sort of get a sense for, you have this protection of women. It's instantiated through chivalry. You take it away, right? Within that void. I know it takes a very long time. I get that. Momentum is weird at scale, right? It takes a very long time. Into that void comes feminism. And there's nothing good about feminism. So, like, want to get rid of that for sure, somehow. This is not a proposal on how to do that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of one thing I kind of noticed, at least I think I noticed, that I think is easy for people to understand about non-optional components of the world, right, of reality, things that you can't just do without because you want them to work differently. That's not how the world is, right? The world was created before your desires and before your intellect and before your consciousness, or whatever other nonsense, crazy term you want to use. And therefore, you have to be careful what you change in it. Hopefully, guys, you got something out of this. If you did, like, subscribe, and look, thank you very much for your time, energy, and attention.